Alright, figured I'll do a first video for an economics page I intend to put up. And so this video will be there eventually. And I haven't figured out exactly how to format it and whether the comments will be on these videos or someplace else, but probably on these videos. Anyway, that part doesn't matter. The idea will be going through different subjects as progressively as possible, from start to finish. Try to separate some of the arguments. So anyway, how to start the subject? Where is the beginning of economics? I probably should do an overview video about what the problem is. Well, I'll state what the problem is. The rich are too rich. It's kind of a simple logic you can apply. That there's a point where, especially when you tax interest income less than working income, that you'll have more interest income and people will get richer. The rich will get richer, and the rest of the population, called the workers and the loafers, will get poorer. And they'll have to rent more stuff from the rich, essentially. Because the rich will claim ownership to all the real property, and everybody else will just kind of rent their existence. We're sort of in that position. Even people who think they own their house, well, they also owe, as part of the United States, being a United States citizen, a couple $100,000 worth of debt money. So their equity in their house might just be wiped out by that. So in a way, the rich do claim prior ownership, in a way, to a couple $100,000 worth of your assets, in terms of they own a debt slip saying they own it. So anyway, money always comes up in these conversations, so I'm going to talk a little bit about money. I've been over this before, so if you've heard it, you're going to hear it again. There's different theories about the creation of money, and they call it debt money and all that kind of stuff, and money's created by debt. And no, I think that's nonsense. Money is created by collateral, by assets. Money is a representation, in most cases, of assets. The first money was basically deeds. People owned property. They had some sort of official paper stating their claim of ownership, defining it, and they could trade that piece of paper in circumstances. The problem is you can't rip the piece of paper up and give people pieces of the piece of paper. That gets kind of complicated, because then you have to write up new pieces of paper saying this is only 10% or 5% or 2% of a claim of ownership. So everything became kind of fraudulent also, because people would just write up a fake deed and say there's some money. And that's not going to work either. So the best thing you could possibly, the best evolution of that simple system would be to have pieces of paper that were reliable, that you could really count on. And those would be ones signed by the king, of course. And so you could denominate them now easily too. So if the king was making paper saying this is worth, a half of a sheep or a lamb's leg or some kind of crap, that's a value. It could be just taken to the king and he would give you the lamb's leg. So it was kind of a simple contract paper where you were guaranteed value. If you had a piece of this paper, you could go somewhere and cash it in for something. And that's the important part. You could get a hard asset. So it was a guaranteed piece of paper. You didn't have to worry about somebody dropping dead, some handshake, and somebody ripping you off and all that kind of crap. It was made rock solid, reliable, so everybody could depend on it and do lots of commerce. And it could be denominated into little bits. So if you were just buying a popsicle, you could pull out a piece of paper that was popsicle size. And if you were buying something big, you could pull out a piece of paper that was big size. And so exists currency, money. And it is a representation of a guarantee, which is usually based on something like collateral. Now, obviously, the king always had a ton of assets, so no problem paying off the paper produced. And in the current banking system, there are rules. You basically do have to collateralize things with assets that have some sort of realistic, probabilistic value. The catch is, as I have been recently pointing out, so we have these institutions in the world that aren't asset-based. So where banks take in things like mortgages, where they own a piece of property before they loan money, things like stock certificates are troublesome, because people take those and trade those as if they're real money, and they're way overvalued. Their value is based on the capacity of the corporation to provide future earnings and to pay a dividend every year. So it's the strength of the corporation, not its real value, that people own. And so if tomorrow, all of a sudden we invent something and it makes cars completely unnecessary, and all the car businesses have nothing to sell, they all go out of business, nobody can get any asset value for the car companies. They're way overvalued in the sense that the stock certificate says you own $200 of a company, but in fact you only owe $2 of a company, because that's what the assets will be worth when they're sold off. And then when you calculate how much debt some of these companies already carry, the stock price becomes even more preposterous. But anyway, so that's the problem, is if you have different kinds of paper that you're calling or using as currency, then currency becomes garbage. So in the current system, there's not that much cash in circulation. In America, there's 5 trillion. That's not great, because it was only 3 trillion just 5 or 6 years ago. So it has, the amount's almost doubled in circulation, which is inflationary in the long run. Or else you either got to get that currency back out of circulation eventually, but the longer it stays out there, the more likely it is to generate inflation eventually. But it's still pretty rock solid. It's not that much money. The federal government obviously has $5 trillion worth of assets. It can cover the cash. The problem is the bonds. You got 15 or 16 trillion dollars worth of those. You've got a bunch of promises to the future in terms of pension and social services that you're not collecting enough revenues to pay. But that's a separate issue. Let's just go with the paper. So the other papers that are out there are deeds to property that has been demonstrated to be sort of overvalued, and these stock certificates. And yes, and these are all counted as a kind of currency. They dilute the currency in a way, but the currency is the thing that really it moves the quickest through the system. And if anything, everything ever had to be paid off, if debts actually had to be paid, they usually have to be paid in currency, and so there's always demand for currency currently. So even though the government's making more of it and not accounting for that, the fact is there's so many people that need currency to pay debts still, that the currency still holds its value. But once the unpayable debts are realized, in the sense that those payments aren't made anymore and people don't even try, the value of the currency will start to depreciate more rapidly. And especially if people aren't buying as much and there aren't these debts to pay, or they've given up on trying to pay them, then the currency will realize its value. And as if the rest of the institutions start failing, like the stock market, their depreciations, their destruction of claims of ownership will also degrade the currency. But anyway, that really has to happen, because the real problem is there's just too much debt. There's too few people holding too many papers saying they own everything. And rent demands interest. That means it demands a gain on just owning surplus. So there's this expectation, if I have one camera and I call it surplus and I put it over there, I have this expectation that next year there's going to be one camera plus another 10% of a camera. And that expectation, as long as it exists, requires somebody to pay that 10% extra. And it has to either be a consumer or it has to be a worker. Because those are the only two people that can create that extra 10% of a camera. And so that's the problem with the system. There's everything essentially has been turned into surplus. Everything has been turned into something somebody's trying to monetize and collect a profit on. So there's rent everywhere. And that rental, in the long run, is very expensive and will force consumers and workers to eventually sacrifice all substance in their life, because the 10% here and the 10% there and the 10% there and the 10% there will compound, and they'll be paying interest, and they'll never be working for anything but just to pay off the interest gain demand. They themselves will never acquire any comforts or surplus. I think that does it. So we'll call that video number 1, unless I add something on the way back, and such. So till next time, or instantaneously, as I choose, I suppose. I'm back. Yeah, so beer's crossing. Anyway, too late for you. Anyway, so just summing up. Yeah, so when they say this debt money stuff, and they keep trying to say money's debt, money's created by debt, money, debt. Well, no. Money is a claim of ownership. It's just that simple. You take money to places and you will get stuff for the money. It's a claim of ownership. It's not a claim of debt. And it's just a backward way of thinking about it. Capitalism creates debt paper. That's what capitalism does. That's what this whole idea of interest, usury, making money on surplus, that's where the debt comes in. But that didn't create money. It isn't the same thing as money. Those pieces of paper aren't money. It's that simple. Yeah, there is a distinction. That's why you get paid interest on things, is because there is risk. Those pieces of paper are different. Cash, there's no risk. Bonds, there's a risk. Yeah, nobody wants to accept that, but there is. That's what you're getting paid interest for, taking the risk. And nobody wants the risk to happen, though. That's the big fraud here. So if you talk about defaulting on the bonds, everybody just yells and screams, "You're not allowed to." They're supposed to be guaranteed. No. Sorry. Why are we paying you interest? Anyway, that would just be stupid. Just print the cash rather than borrow the money. Big crow over there hopping about. Oh, he's broken. Oh, he's okay. There he goes. Anyway, so till next time. I don't think I'll add a bunch here. So it's just this first step is what's money, and the next step is how do you turn it into garbage? And that's what they've done. We just don't know it yet. It hasn't been realized as garbage yet. Well, I mean, technically it's not. I mean, if you just get rid of all the fake paper and just leave the money behind, the money's fine. Yeah. Anyway, till next time and such.